Hi folks, HR Funk here with a quick midweek video to address a couple of viewer questions that I've received recently. And the first one has to do with my trigger finger and trigger finger placement on the trigger when I'm shooting. The viewer asked specifically if when I'm shooting I use the pad of my trigger finger or if I use the joint of my first knuckle here. The answer to that is I use both of those techniques depending upon what type of firearm I'm shooting. If I'm shooting something with a single action trigger like my Springfield Armory Ronin here, I use the pad of my trigger finger because this is a relatively light trigger, so it doesn't take a great deal of leverage to be able to squeeze the trigger, and by using just the pad of my trigger finger I can press straight to the rear and fire a shot without altering my sight alignment during the course of firing that shot. For anything with a single action trigger, whether it's a 1911 or something like an AR-15, I have basically that same type of trigger system because as I squeeze the trigger on this carbine, the only thing that it does is release the hammer, and the hammer falls just like that. So again, anything with a single action trigger, I use just the pad of my trigger finger in order to fire. On the other hand, if I am shooting a double action revolver like my 686 here, because this has a heavier trigger pull and longer, I need a little bit more leverage on the trigger to be able to squeeze it without starting to cause my hand to shake and again alter my sight alignment and all that. So when I'm firing this revolver, I'm using that joint of my first knuckle there on the trigger to get that additional leverage and be able to manage that trigger very well through the entire length of the trigger stroke. If I'm firing one of the various Poly Striker guns like this one, I use that same technique because a lot of times these pistols have a long take up and I just feel like I'm able to manage the trigger a little bit more and control it a little bit better with that additional leverage, the same as when I'm shooting a double action revolver. So for something like my IWI Masada here or a Glock or my Smith & Wesson M&Ps or whatever, I use that joint of my first knuckle in order to get that good trigger press and hopefully fire an accurate shot. So at this point you might be asking yourself, well gee, HR Funk, what if you're shooting a handgun that has two different trigger pulls like this 5904 where the very first shot is a double action pull and every shot after that is a single action pull? Again, for this I use that joint of my first knuckle because I want that additional leverage when I'm squeezing that first double action shot, and then when the slide cycles I just keep my trigger finger there. I don't try to reposition it, and I'm able to manage those follow-up shots just fine with my trigger finger in that location using that joint of my first knuckle. The second question I received had to do with attaining a proper sight picture, and the viewer asked if I keep both eyes open when I am obtaining my sight picture and firing my shots, or if I close my non-dominant eye when I'm shooting. The answer to that question is yes. It all depends on what type of shooting I'm doing, whether or not I close my non-dominant eye. For very close, fast shooting where I'm coming up on target and trying to squeeze off shots, and I'm not quite as worried about pinpoint accuracy, I keep both eyes open. And that's regardless of whether I'm shooting a handgun or a long gun. If I'm trying to fire a very precise shot, or if I'm using a magnified optic when I'm shooting, as in a rifle scope, then I will close one eye in order to block out as many distractions as I can and concentrate on my sight picture, my sight alignment, and squeezing off the perfect shot. And I find that closing an eye helps me to do that. So again, it all depends on what kind of shooting I'm doing, whether I close an eye or whether I don't. So there you go, folks. 2 shooter tips, probably for new shooters, more so than some of you who've been shooting for a long time. But again, I wanted to address those questions and hopefully get that information out there. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions or comments, as always, make sure you forward those to me. Remember, if you purchase anything from Optics Planet, be sure to use my discount code, which is And if you use that discount code, it's good for 5% off your purchase from Optics Planet. Also, remember the new discount code from Hot Munitions. If you go to Hot Munitions, you can use my discount code there, which is HRFunk10, and that'll save you 10% off your purchase from Hot Munitions. See you next time, folks. And until then, with a good trigger press and either one eye or both eyes open, good shooting. Bye-bye.